And I want to expand that image and that stereotype to realize and find the bridge between the classical and the folk world, that both can exist on the instrument. And it's really about reimagining what is possible and thinking beyond what the instrument was designed for.
Hi, Amelia. It's so nice to have you back here again.
It's so nice to see you again, Victoria.
I have basically, I call it, I bonded with you over the love of lever shifting ever since you came here to talk about your lever harp program for modern harpists. We'll get into that later. But let's start by telling us about your journey in music and how do you end up with the harp?
What a great question. I think everyone has such a special story to tell. I was fortunate enough to be exposed to it in fourth grade. I had a friend that was playing it, and then my to be harp teacher came to the school at an assembly and played with one of her students. And I was just mesmerized, and I felt that is the sound that I want to participate in. And the funny story that followed was that my parents were uncertain that that was the right choice because it's a bit challenging to carry. And as a 9-year old, maybe I didn't quite know what voice I wanted, musically speaking. So we listened to a CD-ROM of all the orchestral instruments. You'd press on the image and then you'd hear the instrument. And after going through the entire orchestra, I was still convinced. So my parents decided to rent one for me in the Christmas of that year.
You're always a little different than what I have envisioned someone, say, growing up in North America would be in terms of the music taste. And you did an interdisciplinary study in that field. Tell us about that and what draw you into that part of the world and how does that perhaps influence your musical taste?
That's a great question. I feel like I grew up playing Latin American and world music in a teen harp ensemble under the instruction of Beria Lever harp teacher Diana Stork. And that really just exposed me to the exciting and contagious rhythms from Latin America, Central and South America, as well as musics from other regions of the world, scales, as well as the folk tunes and melodies. So I kind of took that for granted almost as a child growing up because I just enjoyed it, and it was the world that I was immersed in. And then I chose to go to Cal and actually study with Cheryl Ann Fulton, East Bay harp teacher, on her touch and tone technique, and continued with lessons at that time. But I was also focused on my studies with my interdisciplinary field major. And that major looked at the relationship between peace and conflict studies, the environment, and psychology. But I always found a way to weave music back into that larger picture. But those other topics really fascinated me in terms of understanding the human condition and the human experience. And from that point, I actually learned of the Playing for Change Foundation that is based in Los Angeles, but has music schools in many different regions of the world, from Ghana, West Africa, to Guguletu Township, right outside of Cape Town, South Africa. And at the time, they had just started the school in Guguletu, and I was fascinated by the history of apartheid in South Africa. So I went and studied abroad there and had the opportunity of going once a week to the music school and working with the students there. And that inspired me to actually, once I finished my degree that focused, I wrote an actual thesis on the legacy of apartheid in South Africa. And I looked at the impact of the apartheid system and how it impacted the environment and where people lived, as well as the psychological effect. And then I tied music into that as well. So then I returned once I had completed my undergrad at Cal. I returned to Cape Town and lived there for a year and was immersed in the community and the music and the culture of that space. So that kind of ties it all back to the influence as a child and how it then inspired my trip abroad and my continuing love of rhythms and scales and kind of the histories that are tied with those music traditions. So yeah, that was an abridged version of a 10-year journey.
Wow. How is the harp scene over there like?
There really is not one. I brought harpsicles to the school that I was working at, and I learned some of their music and how to put it on the harpsichord, which was a really fun and challenging experience. And like anytime you go abroad or somewhere else, you have, whether you recognize it or not, you have a plan of what you hope to accomplish or offer to the communities. And in the end, oftentimes the one visiting is the one that's more changed than the ones that they visit. So from that year abroad, I actually came back and started writing much of the music that was on the New Perspectives album. So the actual harp community there really, you can find harp players and teachers, but there wasn't a rich community that I went to. It was more of a music school that I went to with a vision that got me curious and inspired.
And before we get into new perspective, I know you're working on a master degree on classical lever harp performance, which is a very specialized field. I thought, not something that I generally again hear people do. How's that working out, and what makes you want to bring classical music onto the lever harp?
I love that question because I think that's kind of my life pursuit, which is we have stereotypes of what instruments do, and with the lever harp and the folk harp, it's really centered around diatonic folk music, and I want to expand that image and that stereotype to realize and find the bridge between the classical and the folk world, that both can exist on the instrument. And it's really about reimagining what is possible and thinking beyond what the instrument was designed for, which was you set the key and then you play within that key. So I think about 6 or 7 years ago, came across Barbara Brundage's Classics on Request. And that was one of her first books to invite lever players to start thinking about lever shifting and playing more the classical repertoire modified for the lever harp. And I was so fascinated, and I found so much joy going through this music that I always associated with the pedal harp in the classical world, and realizing that I could participate in that. And because the lever harp doesn't fit in terms of volume and chromaticism into the orchestral context, this was a way for me to bring it into a chamber music context.
And what are some of the challenges in playing these more chromatic music on the lever harp? And what are some of the pieces that you have played on the lever harp that perhaps we wouldn't expect to hear in a lever harp very easily?
Yeah, I think this semester I'm working on, let's see, Handel's Passacaglia. And that's definitely, it's not incredibly lever harp demanding, but it definitely, the sound and the overall character of the piece really wants a grandiose experience, a sonic experience. So it's how can you visually portray that without having the big instrument and the full range of the instrument. In some cases you retune some strings, in other cases it's about the gestures to give the audience a sense of this full powerful tone. And then there's also, I'm working on Paradisi's Toccata, and it's just a matter of, like most harp players do, practicing slowly and understanding the key changes and where you're going next, and memorizing. I think it's really, we'll talk about the lever shifting program later, but what I work through with the students and participants really is how to, all the steps to thinking about chromaticism. And first is just being comfortable shifting the lever, but also understand where are we moving, understand the circle of fifths. Okay, if we start in C, then we're moving to G. Okay, now we're moving back to C, to understand where we're going. So there's many ways of thinking about chromatic music versus just, oh my God, there's a lot of levers going really fast. How do I keep track? And of course, I'm kind of paving my own road, figuring out as I go. And that's the joy in the journey. So yeah.
And I think that's a good segue back into the lever harp program, which was the first feature that you have appeared on Talking Harps that we talked about. What were some of the surprises that came out of your student? And you're also going to be running a second cohort of the course. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I think just like myself, a number of harp players were just grateful to be able to have some tools and how to approach a piece that has lever shifts. Some folk pieces have a lever shift here or there, but having a work where you constantly see lever shifts taking place and knowing how to approach them systematically and be able to then execute consistently. So I had a number of students that just said, that was really helpful. I was able to think about it in a new way. I was able to practice in a new way. And anytime you learn a new skill, yes, you can learn it on your own and figure it out, but there is a strategy and procedure to everything. And when you follow those, it works quite well. So I think that was one of the best outcomes for a lot of students and for myself, just seeing the range of repertoire that I've built over the years that start from some more simple pieces like Für Elise that Brundage adapted or transcribed rather, that has just a couple shifts, but really gets you used to those shifts and comfortable moving between the strings and then the neck. And then the last piece that we looked at in week 6 was Sonata in Re by Matteo Albanese. And that one I actually had to add measures in just because we'd shift across 3 keys from maybe D major back to C. And you just didn't have the time in one measure to get all those 8 lever shifts. So it's all about shifting on a beat and practicing that beat every single time so it's consistent. And then knowing how long you need to do it so that the audience, as long as you keep the rhythm and you keep the energy, it doesn't matter what you do. And I think that's really understanding instead of feeling frantic about the motion up on the neck versus just the motion in your fingers with the strings. It's understanding how to coordinate the two and how to make it all part of a musical dance.
I have both lever harp and pedal harp, and I'm learning on both. And I started a chaconne that written by Handel that Josh has included in his transcription for lever harp. And I recently played on the pedal harp again, and I can't believe how much more I actually enjoyed playing it on the lever harp. Because when I change the lever, it's served as a very visual cue that I'm gonna be hitting that string soon. There is, like you said, there's a rhythm and a rhyme of reason to your lever change. It's not just happening randomly, and it actually helped me memorize the music better. Whereas when I'm just changing the pedal with my feet, I'm not making that same kind of connection. So I thought that was a very interesting experience for me playing the same piece on both the lever harp and the pedal harp.
That is actually very, very interesting. I'd be curious to see other people's experience because you don't have, I don't personally know that many harp players that do play chromatic music on both lever and pedal. Oftentimes harp players will go to a lever harp because the piece they're playing doesn't require chromatic movement in the song and they want the ease of transportation. But having a harp player learn on both instruments and be able to compare the two is a great perspective. And I do personally like it as well because it helps me visually see where I'm going. And one thing we talk about in the seminar for modern harpists is how to look between the strings and the levers. Because the worst moment is when you know you need a shift, but you haven't visually looked at the lever you're about to shift. And unlike pedals, where you know where your feet go, each pedal is a specific string, the lever harp doesn't have any indication that it's a C. It just feels the same. You just have to visually spot it before you move it. So that's, as you're saying, it's that visual experience as well as physical with your hands versus your feet.
Definitely. And when are you running the second group of this class again? And how can we sign up if we're interested in this?
Yes, so the second group is going to start February 16th. And again, it's going to be the same as I did this past seminar with 6 weeks, an hour per week. And I can have you put the link to the page for my website,
Definitely.
as well as that just has a link to my email to email me. And I've had a number of people just email me to connect on the subject because that's an easy way to do it. And yeah, I'd love to work with you. I think it's so fun just to see the possibility of the instrument because really every style deserves a place on lever harp. It's just the matter of modifying and taking the time to execute well.
Uh, your comment there just sparked a question for me. I know a lot of the classical pieces tend to use, all 47 string or a good chunk of them on the big pedal harp. How are you finding it on a smaller lever harp?
So I have I guess one of my harps has 34, the other has 36. And I do a lot of modifications of octaves. So instead of doing a low octave, I might just do a double or do just an octave above or even two octaves above. And then, so instead of like, depends on how you think about it, but I'll say like instead of an F6, I'll use an F4 and then I'll go down to F5. And as long as I'm getting, I think the big thing that I've enjoyed about classical technique is the focus on tone quality for every note. So I don't care if you're really low on the instrument. If you have a good tone, the two octaves higher won't have the same impact. If you can really give a gesture that tells the visual of a low, powerful note. So oftentimes I will just put it up an octave. And I think every harp player feels this way, especially for lever harp, but you always want like one or more, two or more strings. Like maybe if I just had two more on the bottom or two more on the top. But I find when I get those two more, they're great. But in some cases, I just retune my lowest C to a B. If I have like a final note is a B and that really counts, tune it. So it's a mixture of octave, shifting up the octave, or sometimes two for the sake of the 4-1 pattern, and then also just retuning. And then sometimes knowing the harmonies that are in there and what notes do I need. And that's actually the group that was part of the first seminar. I'm actually doing a 2.0 for lever shifting harpist because we're looking at how to adapt music. Because it's great if you're given a piece that has the lever shifts and it's literally about how to identify them and then practice shifting and understanding the overall mapping of the chordal progression. But what if you get a piece that you want to work on for lever harp and there's nothing there? How do you figure out what to adjust? How do you determine what notes are important? All those pieces. So that's something that I'm doing in my own studies with my teacher, because we'll find a piece that's really great and either it's not transcribed, or in some cases it is transcribed, but I go through it and realize I'm doing more work shifting levers than actually creating music. And that's another important moment that I'm pretty fast at lever shifting. I've made techniques for going high up near the neck so I can do quick shifts. Because of course, if you're in the middle of the string where the best tone is, you can't often get up high to get the lever shift fast enough to execute it and get back to the string. So in some cases, you just have to create more of a percussive sound. So yeah, that's been kind of in that process of just, if you know what the composer wanted and you know what's trying to be communicated in the music, especially with harp music, there's a lot of notes that are either grace notes or ornamentation or filler that aren't required. So sometimes it's just about taking apart the music and finding the skeleton and then determining from there, what extra material do I want and what extra material isn't necessary.
I'm so grateful that there are harpists like you who are taking some of the breaking some of the boundaries, really, or stereotype of what we're seeing in an instrument, and really exploring the different possibility of the instrument. I cannot thank Josh enough for taking a lot of the classical piece and transcribe it for the lever harp, because not a lot of people have access to a pedal harp, but we still like that music. So I really enjoy what you're doing with your program there, and hopefully there'll be more people come on board and give it a shot, because really lever shifting is so much fun.
I think it's great that we connected, because I don't know any other harp player that gets so excited about lever shifting like I do.
Well, there's at least one. I'm pretty sure Josh too. So you
That
have
is
at least
true,
two
both of
friends
you.
here. Yes,
We're all
awesome.
looking for comrades in
Exactly.
that adventure.
And he was the one who introduced you to me, because he realized that I also love lever shifting. So when he talks to him, he said, "I think you should talk to her." I'm like, "Great, sign me up." Perfect.
Exactly. No, I'm so glad that that conversation led to these.
Yeah,
It's
that's
always,
awesome. Well, I now want to talk to you about new perspective. You have already shared about some of the background of the album and the music in Music for the Harp. But tell us about that album. I think that's the only album that you have used a electric harp that I can see. Um, yeah, like what brought you into doing that album, and what are some of the things that you want to convey in this album?
yeah, the so I had chosen to take up electric harp after returning from South Africa and just wanting to have kind of a new instrument to express myself without having to change instruments. So, and with the acoustic lever harp being more of a seated visual, I wanted to be able to stand and just have a different sound and experiment with that sound. So the electric harp felt like the perfect next step. And I had a group that I'm still part of that called Stringquake that I had started using the electric harp with. And we played a mixture of world and Latin American music, as well as original compositions experimenting with odd meters. And the electric harp was just perfect in delivering in a different way. It wasn't about, the focus wasn't on purity of tone, but rather the exploration of sound. And the electric just delivered that in a way that was very, very exciting. And it still had the Kamak levers and the string type. It was a mixture of nylon and Sabrez, but it just worked really, really well. And New Perspectives, the actual focus there was to bring together musicians from the Bay Area that I had become friends with and gotten to know being a freelance musician. So every track features a different friend or collaborator from either my groups or just one-off gigs that I connected with. And there's only one piece by Deborah Hansen Nataliana that is just solo harp. So the idea really was to cover the gamut of what the harp can be, from, the Etta James, I'd Rather Go Blind, all the way to a number of my compositions, including the title track, New Perspectives, that was inspired by my time living in Cape Town, as well as just the other rhythms and styles that influenced my work. So it was really kind of a celebration of where I was at in the moment. And it also included me singing, which is something that I haven't focused on as of late, but enjoy doing very much in the bigger picture of my career.
And you
So,
have a rendition of the Baroque Flamenco by DHC in there as well. Again, very different than what we would normally expect. How did you came up with that version of the piece?
I love when I saw your question email and I thought, man, I need to go back and listen. It's been so many years. And I was fortunate enough to work with a friend and colleague who always wanted me to do something a little bit different than what the page said. And I think by the time I finished New Perspectives, I understood the value of doing pre-production. No one has really told me about pre-production, but once you get in the studio, you want to execute. The focus is just getting the performance well done, but you have to have a plan to do that. And Baroque Flamenco is an example of, basically, we didn't have as much of a plan, but the colleague that was producing this piece suggested, why don't you open up with a guitar solo? Because we know the piece, so why don't we have something a little bit different? And then we also wanted to just create harmony because it wasn't just a solo harp piece for this version. So I think it was a mixture of being creative, finding new ways of just hearing guitar and harp, those voices, in kind of a new context. I think the whole theme of New Perspectives literally was for a new perspective on the instrument. How can we use the instrument in all these different genres? And Baroque Flamenco is a perfect example. The guitarist who I recorded with is his focus is on flamenco and other Latin American styles. So he really loves that, the rhythms and the ideas behind that style, the styles that come with accompanying flamenco dancers. And that just worked really, really well. So I think it's a matter of, I've never done well sticking to the page. I'm now learning how to stick to the page and play it really well, but I think it's also really valuable to know, as I say, learn the rules, then break them. I think I did the opposite. I first broke the rules and now I'm learning them, but they're both gonna happen. So I think that was a perfect way of breaking the rules a little bit. There's this piece, it was fantastic. How can I bring guitar in and highlight what's so great about it?
I'm actually quite enjoying that version of it because I play that piece on my own, and I mean I stick to the page, and I'm not even too good at sticking with the page sometimes because it's a very expressive piece, and I felt that you have done a really good job in in using your creativity and bringing out a different, yeah, a new perspective of Baroque flamenco, which is great.
Yeah, thank you for asking that question and highlighting that, because you probably know this from experience of recording music. You go in it, you do it, you present it, and then you come back years later, and it's just helpful to remember where you've gone, what you've done, and what worked. The things that stick for us is probably because either it spoke to us or it works well. There's lots of pieces that we write, learn, and then shelve.
And I think that was just a really nice snapshot, like you said, of who you were at that time, celebrating who you were as a musician, right? So now going
Exactly.
forward, right now you're working with a group called, is it called Luminance? I just want to make sure I'm saying this
Yeah, no,
properly.
you got it.
I got
You're
it.
correct.
Okay. Tell us about this group and what kind of music does this group play?
So this group is really, I think, has moved into my celebration of learning classical repertoire because both musicians are classically trained and we mix our worlds. So it's kind of the marriage of, I don't even want to use the word folk, the marriage of Latin American inspired rhythms and my original compositions with classical repertoire. And and I mean in the sense that like we take Chopin's Prelude number 4 and we make it into a tango.
Ooh.
And then, I mean, we play it through as written. It's important for the audience to know that you can play the music as it was intended. I think that's the first step. Know what's intended and then offer another perspective. So I think this group kind of brings both my love of Latin American music as well as the celebrates the traditions of classical European music. So we've got some Debussy in there. We've trying to think about all the different. We've got an Argentine composer. We mix it up to really show the colors of kind of the focus is kind of a little bit on French composers because the cellist loves French music and has brought just some really great music to our attention. And I enjoy working with musicians that have a different background and are attracted to different styles because then you get to taste other entrees in the music realm. So that's just been very fun. And we each have a different way of thinking about music, and we're now being able to bring our minds together in creating the sound that we create. And coming from Stringquake, which was really about experimentation with rhythm, and I would call it fast and fiery, and that was really fun. But now I'm learning how to really create consistency and quality, whatever tempo on that. And Debussy's Reverie is a perfect example of that because it's almost like you're on a cloud the whole time. And the idea is to really, you don't want to feel like there are bar lines. You don't want to feel like there's restrictions, but you want to feel the pull, the tensions, the releases, the highs and the lows. And our job as musicians is to bring the audience member on that journey, whether they know it or not.
And what instruments are in this group and where can we find the music?
Great question. So like the theme of my career essentially is how can I take something that we don't expect and put them together and make them work? So our instrumentation is trumpet, cello, and harp. And cello and harp are not that uncommon, especially with their range and a bowed sustained versus plucked instrument. But bringing the trumpet in the mix has always surprised people, and it's fun in that sense because you really have to think about what are our instruments used for in the classical context, and how can we also step outside that and try new ways of exploring our sounds. So this past June, we released an EP titled Late Dawn, and it features 6 tracks. And most of them are originals, actually composed by the group together, or one individual brought an idea and then we all kind of edited our parts to support that idea to its fullest. But we're really looking at how to take our voices and complement one another and think outside the box in that process and execute with the precision and quality that we think good music deserves. So it's been very fun, and you hear trumpet in a very different context. It's not as as a trumpet player made an analogy. The trumpet's like that wave right before it crashes in the symphony, because the strings are kind of just like the water, and then the wave comes and you hear the trumpet. But with our group, we are all participating together, and we don't have to wait for that big triumphant moment to hear the brass. And it's an invitation for listeners to notice whether, again, they have a stereotype of what trumpet should be, both in volume, in timbre, as well as function, and how to step outside that and think about it in a new fashion. So it's been very fun for all of us.
That's awesome. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I remember when I was browsing your website, I believe I heard a harp and trumpet rendition of the Canon in D. Am I correct?
We're going to delete this from the interview, right?
Yeah, we can delete this from the interview, but I just thought it was the most unexpected combination of sound I've heard.
Yeah, so I basically, whenever I meet people that I want to work with, I refuse to accept whether the instrumentation makes sense. So we've actually done a lot of duo playing at private gigs for weddings, and people, it's the usual response, oh, trumpet and harp, I don't know about that. And then we send them clips, and then by the end they say, oh, okay, that works. So yes, we do have a recording of the Canon, and that was from about 3 or 4 years ago. But it is there, and it was really fun to write because, again, having a sustained instrument while you have the pluck and knowing the volumes to work with and the harmonies to accent, just a fun journey.
I just thought it was very creative. Can I stay in the interview? Because I really want that.
You're
Oh
well.
my
So
goodness.
I realize as a professional musician, you take all the work you can get, and especially coming out of the pandemic, we feel extra vulnerable in that sense. But I'm very I try not to highlight the private gig side of my work, because there are some harp players that are wedding harpists, and I really appreciate the focus of creating repertoire and honing repertoire that's really for that setting. And I think that's a very important role, but that's not the trajectory that I'm on. So when people ask about wedding music and repertoire, uh, I'm slower to offer up information. I'm like, yeah, we do those, but yeah. Anyway, but you're welcome to include what's useful for you. I'm happy.
I have to admit, I'm not a big fan of Canon Indie, and it is one of those pieces that I'm actually refusing to learn on the harp, believe it or not. I have people ask me, are you gonna learn it? Are you gonna play it? It's a harpy piece. I'm like, no, I'm gonna stay out of it. But I was really curious because I knew you're gonna do something different with it. So I clicked and I listened and I was like, that's the Amelia I know.
That's so funny. See, I'm really glad we're friends virtually, or whatever you want to call this, but I just love hearing people say they don't want to learn a piece. Like I'm so stubborn. I didn't know I was so stubborn. And then I learned I was so stubborn because people would like ask me to do things, and I was like, excuse me, no, I will not learn that. I will not spend more than 20 minutes on this piece. So I really, yes, I appreciate.
I will be the first to admit I'm not one that will just take any piece of music that the teacher throw my way and learn it. Like I want it to be an enjoyable experience for myself. So I get pretty choosy with what I play, but I think that's what make music magical for me is I'm doing something I enjoy, and I can see that in what you're doing too. You're doing something you enjoy that would brings you joy instead of doing what everyone else would like us to do, which I think is fantastic.
I'm I have a really, just in life, I have a really hard time faking it. If I don't like something, I know people can pretend like they do for social etiquette, and I'm working on it when really necessary. But yeah, I'm just kind of like, no, I'm not interested. And plus, there's such a vast world of quality music that's been untapped or
Definitely.
not presented in the specific light that we presented in. And I was part of I attended like the 2 week, uh, it's called YASO, the camp for both teens, young adults focused on pedal harp. And I presented the Matteo Albane's Sonata in Re to a number of pedal harp teachers, and they were just excited to hear it on lever harp. One, realize it's possible on the instrument, and two, that the harp has such a full sound, because I think most players who play lever harp before they go to pedal harp aren't yet mature in their playing. So they kind of see it's like training wheels to the pedal harp. They don't realize the possibility of the instrument. So that was really, really fun. Like, yeah, you can play all this repertoire and it can sound really good.
I think that's what I really enjoy about doing these interviews so far is I'm actually learning there's so much possibility of this instrument and very, I guess in a very indirect way, I am trying to expand my understanding of the instrument and exposing myself to music that I didn't know exists before. And it has been such a wonderful journey to see what people are able to do with the instrument and the kind of sound and music that they came up with. So it's definitely it's a very interesting experience for me too, for sure.
Yeah, no, it's good for you. I think it's fantastic just to learn by interviewing. What a great skill and opportunity.
It is definitely. Now back to interviewing and conversation. We talk about some of your music in New Perspective that is now available as solo harp transcription that we can
Yeah,
buy off your website through, I think it's Harp Column Music and Fat Walking. If
correct.
I want to get started, which piece would you recommend as a first piece out of the
So
bunch?
yeah, I actually, after our last interview, I realized, man, I missed a piece that would be a perfect starter, especially for lever harp players wanting to experiment with like one lever shift or two lever shifts. And that is the composition Stride. I don't have any recordings of it because hasn't been on any albums or part of tours where I've gotten videos. But it's a very simple piece that has a section in D minor and then D major. So you get to shift the lever F from F natural to F sharp. And then the final note of each section ends with a raise of the, believe, C to C sharp, C natural to C sharp. So that's a perfect, like, put your toes in the water with lever shifting. And you can follow in terms of the key change as well. So I highly recommend if someone just wants to try one simple piece that has some fun techniques, as well as a bit of lever shifting, go for Stride. You can kind of take it at any tempo though. The faster you go, probably 80 to the coro note or a little more will be fun. But that's the one I would recommend as like a first step. And then kind of the other pieces go from there.
Awesome. Okay, I'm gonna have to try that. I had my eye on Counterpoint. You introduced it to me, and I've always really liked the sound of it, but I wouldn't mind starting with something a little bit slower and simpler. So I'm gonna check out Stry, and then I'm gonna go
Yeah, I
from
think
there.
you'd like Stride. The other one I will mention is Crazy Day, even though it's very percussive and it's moving throughout. There's very few sections that give a breath or a break. There's only one or two shifts lever wise, and it's great for technique because it just requires a lot of consistent ostinato patterns that you want to have even volume for each note.
Awesome. And how can we stay in touch with your latest work? Where are the best way for us to find you?
Yes. So if you go to my website, you can join my mailing list. And oftentimes I do send out emails for shows that I'm trying to promote, as well as my recitals, as well as I'm trying to be better about sheet music as well. So that's a good place. The other place is on Instagram. I do have an Instagram, Electric Harp, and I am finding more and more information I'm putting on that in that space than cluttering up my website with updates that can be difficult to locate. So I would say Instagram and then my website and my mailing list are the two
Awesome.
good ways. Yeah,
Thank you very much for the chat. I really enjoyed learning about your work and also getting to know you through these conversations. It has been wonderful.
it's been very fun. I appreciate you taking different focus points and kind of pulling all that information together to see the small and big picture.
Well, thank you. Well, I would love to talk to you again. Hope we'll be chatting again soon.
Likewise, thank you so much.
Thank you.